Hi, and welcome to the Reclamation Project podcast. We are so glad that you're here, that you're listening, and hopefully that you are a part of the conversation. Today, we're going to continue our conversation on attitude adjustments, and really what this series is and will be is really looking at some of the things that Jesus said in the Bible and really trying to flesh them out. And there's some really concrete foundational principles, I believe, that we all can take and use and see the benefit from. So if you're listening and you don't have a faith-based life, or you haven't grown up in a faith-based tradition, I think you can still listen and hear these words and extract these principles and implement them into your life and see the results as well. So if you are listening and you haven't had that background as we do, please still listen, and hopefully you hear that, and hopefully you're able to see the results of these things as well. So today, we're going to continue through and talking about what it means to mourn.
I like what you said, Jeremy, about it being principles. And for those of you who do have a faith base and that's how you think and that's been your tradition, I think it's important to know that as we use the Beatitudes loosely for this attitude adjustment series, that you know that these are they're simply principles. The first Beatitude ends with, this is the kingdom of heaven. The last one ends with kingdom of heaven, which is really a literary term called inclusial. What he's saying, everything else that is smashed in between, this is what it looks like in the kingdom of heaven. So these aren't hard, fast rules. These are profiles and principles of how one would live their life.
And I think with that, when we say kingdom of heaven, that's a very Christianese terminology that maybe people who aren't faith-based understand. So the kingdom of heaven is basically living for God, and living for his kingdom, and living in a way that is more eternal focused than reality day-to-day focus. So it's big picture versus small picture when we really talk about what that is. So that's where we're going, and what we're talking about today is just the concept in the Beatitudes, as Gary said, which is mourning. And what is mourning? It says, blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. And what is mourning? Because when I hear the term mourning, I'm thinking of death and destruction and mourning. But you don't see that day to day all the time, right? Unless you're in a war-torn zone in maybe the Middle East or Syria, or even in a third world country where there's riots and things happening, like in Haiti. I saw this week where gas prices went up, and it was there was just all this mayhem and whatnot. That's where you see death and destruction on a daily basis, is when you're involved in those, and probably some other things too that I'm not thinking of right now. But you can mourn outside of death and destruction.
Yep.
You can mourn for things that are inhumane, things that are unjust, things that are sick and twisted, and things that cause death and destruction, so to speak.
And I think you can separate it a little bit from mourning and grieving. Really can be two different things. Grieving has the idea that something's gone and past, and mourning, you could be mourning about something that still is or could be. So we have to say, what are those things, what qualifies as those things? I've always been taught it's being able to mourn, be sad about the things that breaks God's heart, the injustice in the world, even macro, as Jeremy mentioned, wars and war-torn places. Or what about the homeless just in your neighborhood? There are things that grieve the heart of God, and those are things I think that he's talking about mourning.
Yeah, and mourning is sadness. It's empathy. Mm-hmm. It's being sad with someone about something that you see that's unjust or just not right. And I think we can mourn those things and be comforted by knowing that. Really when it comes down to that these things are all in God's hands, and they will work themselves out the way that he sees fit. And so I think that's the comfort that you see as well.
And I think some of the differentiation is as well. And so if I'm grieving a lost loved one, there's not much I can do about that. But if I'm mourning, starvation in in Somalia, and if I'm mourning inhumanity to man somewhere else, I can hook an action step to that too. So mourning, I think, can prompt action, and I think grieving is more looking back and trying to make some sense, maybe even reframing what that caused that grief.
Yeah, and mourning is, like we said, it's things that you're sad about. It's things that you're sad for. It's things that are maybe unjust, inhumane. Being upset about those things is mourning too. Being frustrated about those things, and I think that's where we are as a nation, as a world right now. Mm-hmm. As you scroll through Twitter and Facebook, you see a lot of people that are upset about things, and some people are upset about things that are ridiculous, and some people are upset about things that truly do matter. From an internal standpoint. I mean, I see people who are upset about just the pettiest of things that happen to them day to day, and then there's people that are upset about things that are happening to people half a world away, or even in their own country. And so I think from our standpoint as Christians, or as people even, mourning and being mad about injustice are big time, and they're things that we're called to do too. I think a lot of people don't understand that is we are called in the Bible, in Scripture, to take up the burden of people that are less fortunate than us, to take up the burden of the orphan, of the widow, to seek justice and mercy. It's Micah 3:7,
Micah
3:6 and 7.
Yeah.
Where it says that we are supposed to seek after justice and mercy, and
to walk humbly
before our God.
Yeah.
And when we look at this scripture where it talks about mourning and look at that scripture and put them together, we are supposed to seek out justice. We're supposed to walk humbly. We're supposed to seek out mercy. Another place that it talks about that is Isaiah chapter 1. In Isaiah chapter 1, God's talking to this nation and talking about how they have really lost touch with what God's will was, where they have inflicted wounds, where they have hurt people, and then it says, then you come to me and you try to sacrifice to me and you try to lift up prayers and offerings. And in 15 chapter 1 verse 15. Actually, starting in 14, I hate all of your festivals and your sacrifices. I cannot stand the sight of them. That's what he says to this group that's lost sight of what it is and what it means to follow after God and to really seek after him. In 15, it says, from now on, when you lift your hands in prayer, I refuse to look. Even though you offer many prayers, I will not listen, for your hands are covered with the blood of innocent victims. And then in 16, it says, wash yourselves and be clean. Let me no longer see your evil deeds. Give up your wicked ways. Learn to do good. This is verse 17. Learn to do good. Seek justice. Help the oppressed. Defend the orphan. And fight for the rights of the widows. Yeah. And I think that is where we need to be upset, is when we see injustice happening, when we see people who are oppressed because of race, religion, because of nationality, because of who they are and what they look like, what they smell like, where they hang out. When people are oppressed, when they are looked down upon, when they are suppressed from being able to live the abundant life that Christ says he wants for us, we ought to be angry about that. We ought to be frustrated about that. When the orphan and the widow are being just hurt and pushed away, we need to fight for those rights of those people, because it's as Jesus says, what you do unto the least of these, you do unto me. And so we need to look to the least of these, to the people that don't have voices, and we need to be the voice for them. We need to be the ones calling for mercy and justice. We need to be the ones calling for change to happen, so that these people can have that life that Jesus says he wants for us, to have a life and have it abundantly. That doesn't mean extravagance. That doesn't mean money and wealth. It means that he wants us to be to see his fullness and to live with him and in him and in his ways.
And that's the uniqueness of that verse. When God spoke through Isaiah to them, he said, your hands are covered with blood. Now, they didn't go out and maybe actually cause the devastation. Really, what he's saying is, by you not doing anything, you're equally as responsible for the bloodshed and the trauma, the grief, that because of inaction as well. So, I mean, let's make it real. I mean, we'll talk about that in a minute, but it's about perception too. I think if you lived in Haiti, you'd be much more aware. It's about awareness.
Yeah.
So when you see it around you every day, I think you're more aware. 2 weeks ago, I'm sitting in my home, and the guy who owns we sold our home, and now we're renting, and we really like our house. The guy who owns it comes by and lets me know he's selling the house. I'm like, stink! I have to move again, and I'm feeling horrible, and I'm complaining. I may or may have not said a couple of unpastoral like words, and I'm getting boxes, and I don't even know where I'm going to go yet, or when I have to go, and so I'm feeling sorry for myself. And then I'm watching this thing on TV that same night, just about the plight of people in the old Eastern Bloc, the European Bloc. A lot of Jews who are they ran from the Holocaust, but yet they still live in there just poor, no food. And I'm sitting there thinking, I'm feeling bad about myself. And look at these people who they're dying for just something to eat. And I really had to have an attitude adjustment again, just a cheap, what's the word I'm looking for, Jeremy?
I don't know.
Okay. a cheap plug for the actual series. But I had to do an attitude adjustment there when I realized, in America, we live 4 times the global average when it comes to finances and the just the blessings we have. That. And again, I think that's part of the problem. We think we're blessed because we have all that. And that's not necessarily true. It is a blessing to have all of that, but there's a responsibility that comes with having that too. So as I sit home getting mad about my first world problem that I have to leave one house and go to another house, there are people on this planet that live outside of a house. So I think I was mourning more of my situation, which again is normal. I think we all do that. But at some point, the attitude check has to come in, and I have to say, really, what's important? Where I live is not that important in the kingdom.
Yeah.
How other people live really is.
Yeah, and I mean, that's where you need a reality check. I mean, you look at, for instance, my Twitter feed. I was talking to Gary about this, as we were talking through, and you see people who talk about, through this Twitter feed, they're talking about shows going off the air and how bad that is, and I'll be honest, some of this, I have to look at myself in the mirror too, because I was so angry that Timeless went off the air recently, because I like time travel. But anyways, you see people saying things like, oh, I'm so mad that this show went off the air and I'm going to boycott NBC and blah, blah, blah. And then the next Twitter feed is someone like John Legend who's saying, hey, there's these thousands of kids on the border being put in these holding facilities, and that's just not right. And then you see the next one, and it's Shane Claiborne talking about this guy who's on death row and who's about to be executed for his crimes, and you're just like, wow. The fact that my TV show is going off the air doesn't really matter,
in the big picture.
Yeah. But not only that. I mean, the fact that work sucked today. In the whole big picture, it's small. It's small potatoes, and so we need to really seek an attitude adjustment, a reality check, and really start setting our eyes to things that matter, not to ourselves. Although you can, like Gary said, you can feel sadness in those moments, but really, when you're looking at yourself, you're missing the plight of other people that are around there. And I think that's when you miss that, that's where you see God in Isaiah saying, hey, you may not have caused this, but you didn't do anything about it as well. And when you get caught up in yourself, you could miss doing something about somebody else's plight as well.
That's why I don't think it's an accident in the Beatitudes. The first one is, blessed are those who are poor, and blessed just means happy. Those who are poor in spirit, and I mean everything about the kingdom is kind of upside down. If you want to be great, you have to be small, and if you want to be rich, you have to be poor. And so he's not saying that we minimalize everything and be poor on purpose, but sometimes it's a happy thing when God takes things away. I have to move, but yet it made me aware of people that have to move every day. Yeah. So being poor in spirit is a good thing. I think we're so dependent on the blessings God has given us that we can watch a documentary and be sad, and then when that hour's over, turn to King of Queens and be totally happy and laughing, and separate the two in our mind.
So a tangible thing that we see kind of in the Christian world, in the conservative world, is the thought of being pro-life. And pro-life, I believe personally, is a noble thing to do, to really be concerned about babies who are being killed. Not to sugarcoat it, but they're being killed every single day, and there's a lot of them being killed every single day in this country, and that is great. But beyond that, I think there's a bigger epidemic that's around that pro-lifers should also be upset about, and that is, if you've told someone that they can't get an abortion, or convince them that abortion isn't a good option, and you tell them, hey, you should have your baby, you should adopt them out, you should beyond that have them and be the mother to them. I think pro-lifers, conservatives, people who are seeking justice ought to be as concerned about their life after delivery as they are with delivery.
Yeah.
And a lot of times it doesn't happen. I mean, if someone gives their kid up for adoption, I have a sister who was adopted by another family, and you should be concerned about that baby's welfare. And once they are aware that they were adopted, being able to counsel them through that, to counsel a mother who just gave up her child. We should be advocates of counseling for mothers who have done that, and helping them through that step. For the kids that are, for the mothers who decide to keep the babies, who might be 15, 16, even 20 years old, having a kid, being a single parent, I can't imagine that. I mean, my kids, if I had to be a single parent, I couldn't do it. Yeah. I mean, it's such a chore. Being a parent in a 2-family household is such a chore.
Yeah, that's difficult enough.
It's difficult. It's difficult to work through. It's not only that, I look at it and I say, I've been blessed with a job that gives me a good amount of living, and my wife's job and all that. And it's hard from a financial standpoint, 2 kids, 2 incomes.
Yeah.
I can't imagine being a 16-year-old, a 15-year-old, a 20-year-old, and having to go through that and not having the financial means to take care of your kids, and possibly feeling like you're letting them down by not doing that, or having to work 2 jobs and put them in daycare all day. At $300 a week, which is just ludicrous. And I could go off on a rant about that too, but I won't. But as a pro-life person, we ought to be taking care of them after that as well. And I see a lot of the same pro-life people who want them to have their babies, who say, you know what, we don't want you to have welfare now.
Yeah.
Because you're an unwed mother, and therefore, you shouldn't.
Go get a job. Take care of your kids. You should be working 2 or 3 jobs to do it. And to be honest, 2 or 3 jobs doesn't even do it. No.
Regularly, and it takes all the time away, and you're not a mom anymore.
No.
So we ought to be angry about that, and we ought to be frustrated about that, and we ought to be seeking out justice and mercy and love and means for those people as well.
I think the problem is we've narrowed what pro-life is to whatever our own agenda is. So there are those who take the mantle for pro-life and anti-abortion. That's great, but it's bigger than that, as you said. So we get caught on our own little bully pulpits, and it's larger than that. And so if we're to be, we talked about in a past podcast that we're to bring reconciliation to people. That's kind of what we're here for. I leave all the judgment to God. God's going to judge outside the church. He's going to judge. He judges inside the church. He called us to be reconcilers, and that's a pro-life thing. What about? I mean, I've got really lately in my counseling practice to look at somebody and say, what kind of life are they living? They've got money, they've got a family, and they're living a very negative life. And I think Jesus said, "I come to give you life and life abundant." What about that pro-life? That somebody could take the existence they have right now, and I mean, that's kind of what we've done in our ministry past, is to show someone how they can have an abundant life. I mean, that's pro-life too.
I mean, exactly. I mean, I know people who are uber rich or have a good lifestyle, who have huge houses, nice cars, everything you would want, but they are so freaking unhappy.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it ought to frustrate us. It ought to be something that we seek out to help those people who are in that place, rich or poor, rich being maybe poor in spirit,
mm-hmm.
or poor being rich in spirit, as the Bible says.
Yep.
We ought to be people who are trying to reconcile and help them reconcile what that is and how to have that life of abundance. I mean, like I said, I know people who are rich who just, they don't have much meaning in this life, and
mm-hmm.
to show them, and I say show them, and I think that can sound really horrible. Because who am I to show someone else something? But to love on them, to pray for them, to seek after, relationship with them, and maybe showing them other parts of life that they're not seeing because of where they're at. Yes, that's another thing. Another place where I think we can be pro-life is, and maybe we should get off the pro-life term, but I think it's relevant. But a place where we can have mourning,
mm-hmm.
we can have empathy, is kind of the widow. As it says in Isaiah, it says the orphans and the widows, fight for the rights of the widows. And I would even say the elderly beyond that. We I think it was a year, maybe two ago, the government was talking about cutting Meals on Wheels, and before that, there was a bad connotation with the Meals on Wheels. That they were putting out food that was just not nutritious to these elderly people that they were taking it to, and that it was nasty food, just like almost prison food, I would say. Maybe elementary school lunch food. I don't know, but it was slop. I mean, it was slop, and I saw one of the guys get his Meal on Wheels thing on this newscast. He opens it up, and it's just the nastiest stuff in the world. I mean, it's just like piles of kind of stewish type of stuff, and it's just like Meals on Wheels was established so that we could take care of the elderly, and then the government comes around and says, hey, we're going to stop funding that. We should kind of be upset about that, because we're supposed to take care of the widow, the elderly, the people that are the least of these, and our government is cutting it. But beyond that, and Gary talked about it, is we as the church ought to be doing that, not dependent on the government to do it.
Absolutely. It's what we were called to do. I met a Chinese family a couple of weeks ago, and in their home, they have like 3 generations, and they're pretty strict about this is what they do. They don't put their elderly in assisted care, or they take care of them. And so it goes back to that kind of mindset. If we do that in our abundance in this country, we've created places to stick our elderly. And then when you don't see them and they're out of mind, we don't care about them. And that should break our heart. That should cause us to mourn. And true, I think, well, we can get angry at the government. There's plenty to get angry at the government about, but God didn't call the government to do this, because governments come and go. He called the church to reach out and do this. Those of us who have a spiritual nature about ourselves, if we could take our eyes off ourselves, and I think that the only way you do that is if you start looking at people outside of boxes, race boxes, religious boxes, like you said.
How they look, how they act.
I have to look at them outside of all those things and love them as that.
Yeah, and I would say, if I go off on another little tangent here,
It's our podcast. We can do whatever we want.
Right. The church ought to be taking care of a lot of things beyond that. I mean, one of the things that I brought up when we were working at a ministry in Mesa is we have this huge, amazing. We had a great children's director, and she really took and made the children's area, the nursery, all these things, like really made this great ministry at that church that we were at. And I said at one point to the executive pastor, I said, okay, we have this great nursery, we have this great children's thing. We have this neighborhood surrounding this church, literally surrounding this church, that has a lot of people who have toddlers and children. And I said,
both parents working.
Both parents working. And daycare is $300, $400 a week per kid.
Yep.
Why don't we, as the church, take that burden off of them and offer $10 a day daycare just to kind of cover our costs, and that's it. And utilize this nursery 7 days out of the week, and this this kids area 7 days out of the week, instead of just 1 day out of the week on a Sunday, or maybe
3 or 4 hours on a 1 day a week.
And I was met with, well, there's a lot of red tape, that's not really what we're about, this and that. And I just said,
what's in it for us?
Yeah, what's in it for us? Insurance would be a big issue. We need to think about that. And I was just like, if we can't do that for the people surrounding our church, the community that we're in, what are we doing? The church should be serving the community, should be serving the people that are in it. And I think this is a great way to serve those people who are in the community. I mean, I can't imagine. Luckily for us, we haven't had to have daycare. We have family living around us.
Yeah.
But if we ever had to go to daycare, which we're going to have to do pretty soon, it becomes, is it better for my wife to have a job and make a little bit of money over that, or to put our kids in daycare? And to be honest, we're at a point where we're just like, okay, she's going to stop doing her, she's going to quit her job and stay at home, because it financially it makes
sense.
It doesn't make sense to have both kids in daycare, and I'd rather have my kids with their mom than with a daycare person. And I say that, if your kid's in daycare,
and if you're a daycare person, we love you.
Yeah.
But
I mean, it's just a better family situation for us, and that's a choice that we're making.
Yeah. And
so all that to say is, as a church, we should be serving the community in all facets that we can, that we have the ability to, and really removing their burden. And that's not only church, building institution, but that's church people who are followers of Christ should seek after easing the burden of people who are not and are, easing that burden. And really seeking out, how can I help people? And if we started our day with how can I help someone, rather than how do I just get through the day, what an amazing attitude adjustment that would be.
In Jeremiah, when Hebrews were in slavery and in bondage in Babylon, he told them certain things to do, and it wasn't just sit there and feel sorry for yourself. He said, get up, build your houses, plant your gardens, have your children, and then pray for the surrounding city. Like, what? I am in bondage here. And we were even as slaves in Babylon, were supposed to have an effect on those outside. And so I think it's hard to mourn, like we're talking about out of Beatitudes, because we can't see past our own self. And so maybe if you're looking for an action step this week, why don't you, as you drive around, as you just become aware of, listen to people's stories, look not just on the news, but the same people you drive by, the girl at your office, or if you're in a office downtown, there's somebody who takes your money at the toll booth every day. Be aware of somebody and think outside yourself, and actually allow yourself to feel. Really, that's what that word mourn. It's a feeling word. It's both a noun and a verb, and feel for someone. And I'm telling you what, if you've ever done something for someone else and watched joy in their eyes, you can almost become addicted to mourning.
Well, and I'd say, not only observe them, engage them.
No, correct.
Engage them. I mean, that's a hard thing to do for me.
Yeah.
I've said in previous podcasts, I'm an introvert.
Yeah.
I'm very much not a social person. I don't like talking to people one-on-one. I'd rather talk in big rooms and
Or on a microphone.
So people could hear me. I had someone say this week, said that I was actually a really deep thinker and I had a lot to say. I just don't say it. And I was like, okay.
Did you say, well, thanks, Mom?
No, someone at work. But yeah, no, I was actually, like, wow, I've never noticed that part of myself. And I'm like, maybe it is true. I don't know. I got to think about that. But all that to say is engage people, don't just observe them and try to understand what they're going through, but engage them, talk to them. How's your day going? The person serving you coffee at Starbucks, maybe interact with them while you're waiting for your butter croissant to be made. Not that I had a butter croissant this morning, but I did. But talk to them and find out more about them. And I mean, how many times I've heard of people who have built relationships in ministry by talking to the barista at Starbucks.
Absolutely.
I think you've had stories like that. I've heard other people who have stories like that, but engaging them, understanding their plight, and then seeing if there's a way to ease it.
I mean, even engaging someone outside of your comfort zone. I mean, what was the hit on Jesus, that he was a glutton, a drunkard, and the friend of sinners? That can only tell you that he hung around gluttons, drunks, and sinners. And so if you engage somebody, I know maybe the barista with the giant gauges in the ear and the 7,000 tattoos might not be someone you're comfortable with. But if you engage and find out inside that shell, there's a human being with hurts and pains, and maybe, just maybe, something that you can comfort with. So the engaging is the first part. In this Breathing Life nonprofit we started, we have 4 E's that are our go-tos. And engaging is the first one. Second one is encouraging. I can just encourage somebody. If I look at somebody and I can encourage them that day, I know I've made their day. And then when I'm allowed to have a relationship, I equip them and then empower them. That's how you start to make a difference in the world. Let me give you a tangible story. So back in the day, I had a friend who was a youth pastor, and I remember getting a phone call that to come over, and he had 4 kids. His wife has left him for another man and left her family, her children too, and he was distraught. And so I made a point of going over there every day, every night, talking to him, helping him out a little bit. He in that context of church that we are in, if you were a Baptist and you were in the midst of a divorce, whether it was no fault of your own, that means you also lost your ministry. So now not only lost a wife and the mother of his children, he was in line to lose his job, totally distraught. Well, in the context of that next couple of weeks is when we found out my youngest daughter was sick. She ended up passing, but as she was at Phoenix Children's Hospital in intensive care for weeks, my friend was up there every day. He made a point of coming up, staying there with us till evening. Sometimes I would even leave, and he'd stay there with my wife, talking, praying, just doing whatever he could. So after she had passed, we had coffee one day, and he said, "You know what helped me through my issues and my pain was stop focusing on myself and to help you in your pain." And so I think when we read the word mourning, we think about those things that we're sad about. But if we could take our eyes off ourselves, which really is kingdom living, it's not about us. We look out there, and where can we aid or do something about mourning that's in the world that's not ours? I think you want to make something of your life, purpose and fulfillment. That's how we live that.
Yeah, and so I think that's really the takeaway this week is kind of twofold. One is observe and understand where wrongs are being done, where injustice is being done, where mercy needs to flow, where love and encouragement need to happen.
Where grace needs to be given.
Things that you can mourn that are happening, and not only mourn, but do something about. You can get upset and frustrated and tweet out whatever, or Instagram whatever, or
tweeting is not really an action step.
It isn't. but actually doing something about it,
yep.
and making a difference in a person's life. observing those things and doing them. And then also, I think second part of that is just looking outside yourself, like Gary said, is not looking to your own issues, not looking to your own plight, not looking to, oh, woe is me, but instead looking to, what can I do for someone else?
Yep.
How can I make someone else's life better today, whether it be of an injustice or just because, you want to make someone's life better than it was, in helping them through a small issue, a big issue, whatever it may be. Having that awareness to put someone else first, and how much joy you will find coming out of that. And joy shouldn't be your reason to do it.
Correct.
But it should be, again, a byproduct of helping someone out and helping someone move past a problem, an injustice, or something that's just really a horrible place to be.
Well, it's the premise and the promise of the Beatitudes. It says, blessed is the man or the woman who does that. So
Yeah.
That's going to be the byproduct of looking outside of yourself and giving yourself to someone who's least of these.
And take comfort in knowing that Jesus has it all in his hands.
Yep.
Whether it be something you're going through or something someone else is going through, it is all in our Creator's hands, all in our Savior's hands. And so therefore, it's just our job to observe it and do something about it.
Yep.
So hopefully this was uplifting for you. Hopefully it was something that helps you along this week. And hopefully you can see an attitude adjustment in your life when you seek these things out. And we're going to try to seek them out as well. And if you have some of those stories, we'd love to hear from you. Stories of how you did that this week. So with that, there's a couple places that you can reach us. One is Facebook at facebook.com/RP Podcast. Also on Instagram at RP Podcast, and then Twitter at the RP Podcast. We also have our website up for any previous podcasts you might want to listen to or whatnot. And that is rppodcast.com. And you can listen to all those things there and find all of our social networking sites to get a hold of us and all the places you can listen. So thanks for listening, and hope you have a great week.